I want you to step entirely out of your current reality for a moment. Like, just completely step away.
Right. Leave it all behind.
Yeah. If you're driving, I mean, obviously keep your eyes on the road, but mentally just leave the car behind.
Strip away the steering wheel.
Exactly. The steering wheel, your podcast app, those expensive noise-canceling headphones, even the hum of the refrigerator in your kitchen. We are traveling way, way back.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So picture a prehistoric landscape. Twilight is settling in, the shadows are stretching out across the brush and the air's getting cold. But mostly it's just quiet.
And not a modern quiet, right?
No, not the kind of quiet we get when we just close a window. I mean, a heavy, elemental, absolute silence. And in the middle of that vast emptiness, imagine two early humans standing together.
Just the two of them.
Right. One of them takes a breath, opens their mouth, and makes a sound. It's not a word. We don't have those yet. It's just a vocalization.
Like a sustained hum, maybe.
Yeah, or a rhythmic clicking of the tongue. And the other human hears it, but they don't just passively register the noise. They respond.
Oh, wow.
They recreate that exact same sound, sending it back into the twilight. Then the first one does it again.
It's a really striking image, mostly because we have to focus on, everything that is missing from that scene.
Right. There's so much we just assume is always there.
Exactly. You don't have a wooden stage. You don't have an audience sitting in rows holding tickets. There is no written language to document what is happening.
And definitely no musical instruments.
None. No hollowed out logs, no stretched animal skins, no carved bone flutes. We're looking at literally nothing but human breath, vocal folds, and moving air.
Just biology.
Yeah, just biology. Yet, in that incredibly sparse exchange, a rhythm is born. A sound that could have just been a random exhalation has fundamentally transformed into an interaction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that specific transformation from a random noise to a shared interaction is basically the entire foundation of our deep dive today.
It really is.
We are pulling from this fascinating source called Why Humans Invented Music Before Writing Part 2. And our mission for you today is pretty ambitious.
We're basically going to dismantle everything you think you know about what music actually is.
Yes. We're tracking how human sound evolved from being a simple piece of survival data, like shouting to warn the tribe about a predator, into this profound, magical tool for connection.
And all of this happened millennia before the concept of a song even crossed a human mind.
I mean, we carry around this incredibly stubborn, deeply ingrained assumption that music is a hallmark of advanced civilization, right?
Oh, absolutely. We categorize it right alongside the invention of the wheel or agriculture or the printing press.
Like it's a technology.
Right. We think of it as a technology that someone had to deliberately invent. But the sources we're dissecting today actively challenge that entire chronology.
They argue that music didn't just suddenly become this powerful cultural force because a lone genius figured out how to string a hunting bow and pluck it for entertainment.
No. It became a foundational human force the exact moment another person recognized a pattern in a sound, held it in their memory, and made the conscious choice to join in.
Which completely shifts the definition of music, doesn't it? It goes from being a thing you create to a way you connect.
A total paradigm shift.
And I can promise you this, by the time we wrap up this deep dive, your perspective on your own daily life is going to shift. The way you talk to your friends, the way your footsteps fall when you walk down the street.
Especially the way you might try to soothe a crying infant.
Yes. It is all going to feel like you are actively participating in an ancient, invisible orchestra. You are going to see prehistoric fingerprints all over your everyday behavior.
But to get to that point, we have to start at the absolute ground floor. We have to look at the single instrument that predates everything else.
The one every single one of us possesses.
Exactly. The human voice. Because before we can even begin to debate the origins of melody or complex rhythm, we have to understand the raw biological capacity of our vocal anatomy.
And the voice is genuinely extraordinary when you strip away our modern reliance on vocabulary. Like, long before our ancestors had grammar, syntax, or, a dictionary of terms, they had this wildly versatile piece of biological machinery sitting right inside their throats.
Think about how much data you can transmit without uttering a single dictionary-defined word.
Right. Your voice can project incredibly complex emotional states. A sudden sharp shriek warns of immediate danger.
A low, guttural growl expresses boiling anger.
Or a wavering, high-pitched wail communicates sheer agony. And you do all of this instinctively by manipulating pitch, tweaking the volume, accelerating the speed of the sound, or stretching it out.
And if we look closely at the mechanics behind that, it becomes really clear how the groundwork for melody was laid.
Mm.
You mentioned a sudden sharp sound.
Yeah, like a shriek.
Biologically, when a human is terrified, the sympathetic nervous system kicks in. Fight or flight.
Right, your body just takes over.
Exactly. The muscles tense up, and that includes the vocal folds in the larynx. When those folds pull tight, the air pushing through them vibrates at a much higher frequency.
Oh, wow. Resulting in a higher pitch.
Yes, so a high, loud, sharp sound instantly demands attention because it is the literal biological acoustic signature of stress.
That makes so much sense.
Conversely, when we are relaxed, our vocal folds loosen, right? Producing a lower, softer, drawn-out sound, which naturally communicates safety and reassurance to anyone listening.
Now, obviously, none of these biological responses are music, strictly speaking.
No, of course not.
But they are the raw acoustic materials. They are the absolute necessary conditions for music to eventually emerge.
Yeah, they're the building blocks.
It feels like we suffer from this modern obsession with hypercategorization. Like we organize the world of sound the exact same way we organize our Spotify playlists.
Oh, we definitely do. We love our strict boundaries and clear genres.
Right. We tell ourselves, this audio file is a podcast, that audio file is a pop song, this one over here is a classical symphony, and that one is an audiobook.
Right. But our ancestors were not walking around with Spotify playlists in their heads.
No, they were just panting with raw sound. I have to imagine there was never this clean, sudden jump where humanity upgraded from making animal noises in version 1.0 to speaking language in version 2.0.
And then suddenly dropping music as an expansion pack in version 3.0.
Exactly. It just didn't happen that way.
They absolutely were not operating with those boundaries. The human voice itself does not obey the strict categories we try to force upon it.
It's also blended.
Modern societies fiercely separate speech, singing, and language. We use completely different vocabulary to describe them, we teach them in different buildings, and we consume them in different contexts.
But biologically and acoustically, they exist on a very messy, blurry continuum.
It's very blurry. If you strip away the words and run a spectral analysis on the acoustic structure of everyday speech, you will find it carries an enormous amount of information completely independent of the vocabulary.
Like what?
Well, the pitch contours, the variations in timing, the sudden shifts in loudness, the deliberate pauses, all of these are fundamental musical elements embedded right inside normal, mundane conversation.
So a spoken sentence, if you repeat it enough times, can easily morph into a highly rhythmic chant.
Exactly.
If you're listening to this on a walk right now, or maybe doing the dishes, think about how you answer the phone.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
You can instantly deduce a friend's exact state of mind just by the acoustic contour of how they say the word hello.
Right, before they even say anything else.
Yeah, they pick up, they say one single word, and before any actual linguistic information is exchanged, your brain has already analyzed the pitch and timing.
You know, instantly, if they just got a promotion, if they're devastated, if they just woke up, or if they're furious with you.
That is the acoustic structure of the voice carrying immense emotional weight, totally separate from the word itself.
And this is a crucial concept for understanding human history. The source material emphasizes a really profound point here. Music emerged from the enormous expressive space surrounding language, not from the absence of it.
Wait, can you break that down a bit more?
Sure. Early humans didn't need to invent music to express themselves. They already had this vast, continuous spectrum of sound.
Ah.
They needed to communicate immediate needs, they needed to coordinate physical actions, and they needed to project internal emotional states to the group.
So the labels we aggressively apply today, pointing to one sound and saying this is practical speech, and pointing to another and saying this is artistic music, that's a modern cultural overlay.
Yes. It's imposed on an ancient fluid system long after the fact.
I am stuck on that phrase from the source, the enormous expressive space surrounding language. It paints this picture of vocal communication as this incredibly broad spectrum.
It really is.
On one end, you have sounds carrying hard, immediate data, like pointing out a physical object. On the other end, you have sounds carrying pure, abstract emotion.
And somewhere in the middle, you have sounds used to coordinate a group lifting a heavy boulder.
So the building blocks of melody and rhythm were already deeply embedded in our vocal cords, just waiting to be utilized.
Exactly.
But wait, if this didn't start as some grand performance around a campfire for an audience, where is the actual ground zero for this kind of structured musical vocalization?
That's the big question.
Like, who were these early humans actually talking to when they started playing with these sounds?
To find ground zero, we have to look past the adults entirely and examine the most fundamental, high-stakes relationship in the history of our species,
Okay, I'm listening.
the interaction between a caregiver and an infant.
Oh, of course, motherese. Infant-directed speech.
Precisely that. Anthropologists and linguists have documented this as a near-universal human behavior.
We see it everywhere.
Across vastly different cultures, continents, and historical eras, adults instinctively alter the fundamental acoustic properties of their voices the moment they begin interacting with a baby.
We all do it without even realizing it. Like, you walk into a room, you see a 6-month-old, and your voice automatically jumps up a full octave.
Yes, you start dramatically stretching out your vowels,
Your rhythm gets incredibly bouncy. You say things like, "Hi, look at you!"
and you slow your tempo way down. You repeat the exact same sweeping pitch contours over and over again.
Nobody takes a class on how to do this. Your brain just hijacks your vocal cords and forces you to become highly musical.
And the reason this is so vital to the origins of music is that it proves musicality doesn't require a technologically advanced society.
Right.
It completely removes the need for carved instruments, written notation, or even a fully developed language system.
Because an infant's brain is not equipped to process complex syntax or abstract logic.
Exactly. If a baby is terrified, you cannot sit them down, pull out a chart, and present a reasoned argument for why they should stop crying.
Right? You can't exactly reason with a newborn. You can't be like, listen, structurally speaking, the walls of this cave are very thick. The fire is keeping the predators away, so logically you should go to sleep.
No, that is going to get you absolutely nowhere.
So you have to bypass logic entirely and hack their nervous system. And bringing our Spotify analogy back, if we're used to paint with raw sound without genres, then interacting with the baby is essentially creating the original focus playlist.
That is an excellent way to frame it. You are engineering a biological state change.
And how do you achieve that?
You deploy the fundamental mechanics of music. You use a slow, steady tempo to bring their heart rate down.
Wow.
You use predictable, sweeping pitch variations to hold their attention without startling them. You use repetition to create a sense of environmental stability.
So the adult is using the voice as a tool for nervous system regulation.
Yes, these deeply musical features didn't evolve for a stage performance. They were forged in the crucible of everyday survival, solving the very ordinary but desperate problem of keeping a vulnerable child calm and connected.
When you look at it through the lens of prehistoric survival, a screaming baby is a massive liability.
Oh, a huge liability.
A crying infant in the dark is practically a dinner bell for every predator within a 3-mile radius.
Not to mention it spikes the cortisol levels of every adult in the tribe, creating group-wide stress.
Right, everyone is on edge. So the ability to use your voice, just the raw acoustic properties of pitch and rhythm to soothe and regulate another person's nervous system, that isn't just cute. That is a literal superpower.
It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And notice the dynamic of that mechanism. It is fundamentally an act of communication, not passive entertainment.
Walk me through that.
Well, the adult introduces a sound pattern. The infant registers it. The adult repeats the pattern, perhaps introducing a micro variation in pitch.
And the child begins to anticipate the shape of that sound.
Exactly. This creates a feedback loop. The human voice has effectively become a social instrument, and the infant is actively learning how to be a highly sensitive listener.
They are tracking the timing, predicting the next vocal gesture, and physically relaxing when the prediction is fulfilled.
It's the original duet, just two nervous systems syncing up in the duck.
That is incredible. But let's scale this up, because it's one thing to bounce a baby on your knee while making a rhythmic cooing noise. That is a fleeting, intimate moment.
Right.
How does that momentary interaction evolve into a lasting cultural artifact? Like, how do we get from a mother soothing a child in a cave to a complex musical tradition that survives for a dozen generations?
To bridge that gap, we have to examine one of the most peculiar yet defining characteristics of music.
Which is?
Repetition.
I am so glad we're touching on this, because repetition is objectively bizarre when you really stop and analyze it.
It really is.
If the evolutionary purpose of communication was strictly to transmit new information, repeating the same sound over and over would be a massive waste of energy.
Total waste.
Imagine if I walked up to you and said, "The berries are by the river. The berries are by the river. The berries are by the river."
I would assume you were having a neurological event.
Right. But in music, We actively demand repetition. We get frustrated if the chorus doesn't come back.
We want the beat to loop. We want the melody to resolve in a familiar way.
So why does our brain crave that?
To understand the craving, we need to look at the cognitive sequence that repetition triggers in the human brain.
Okay.
The very first time you hear a novel pattern of sound, your brain is in a state of discovery and orientation. It is analyzing the acoustic data to figure out if it's a threat or just environmental noise.
That makes sense.
But the second time you hear that exact same pattern, orientation shifts to recognition. Your brain flags it. It says, I have encountered this specific sequence before.
And the third time?
The third time is where the cognitive shift happens. Recognition turns into anticipation. You now have a mental model of the pattern, and your brain is actively predicting the next note or the next beat before it even happens.
And when that prediction is correct, it feels incredibly satisfying.
It doesn't just feel satisfying. It triggers a physiological reward.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When our auditory cortex correctly predicts a pattern and the sound fulfills that expectation, the brain releases dopamine.
Oh, wow. So repetition hacks our reward circuitry.
Exactly. More importantly, for early human culture, repetition transforms a fleeting sound into a permanent memory. It builds familiarity. And memory is the bedrock on which all culture is built.
Because a sound that vanishes the second it is produced cannot become a tradition. It has to be repeated to be remembered.
Right.
Okay, let's map out that chain reaction because the logic here is stunning. You start with repetition, which hacks the brain and turns a temporary sound into a stored memory.
Correct.
Once it exists as a memory, it can be reproduced. You can pull it out of your mental archive and sing it again 3 days later.
Yes.
Once you have reproduction, you have the ability to teach it to someone else. That allows for lateral transmission across your current group.
And once you can transmit it to the group, you can pass it down to the children. Transmission across time becomes culture, which serves to completely dismantle the romanticized Hollywood version of art history. Well, we love the myth of the solitary genius, right? We picture an ancient prodigy inventing the first song in a sudden flash of divine inspiration.
Right, some guy with a flute on a hill.
But for the vast majority of our species' history, cultural evolution did not rely on individual originality. It relied heavily on imitation.
Imitation.
Yes, one individual produces a sound pattern. Another individual uses their mental archive to copy it. Maybe they alter it slightly, either through an accidental mistake in memory or a deliberate creative choice.
And then a third person learns this new mutated version and passes it along.
Exactly. It is a process of cumulative cultural change, driven entirely by memory and imitation.
I hear that, but I want to stop and push back on this a bit. I want to play devil's advocate regarding the evolutionary logic here.
Go for it.
We know early human survival was brutally difficult. It required hypervigilance. You needed to be constantly scanning your environment, listening for the snap of a twig that might mean a predator is flanking you.
Or tracking the subtle sounds of prey, yes.
Right, so if our survival depended so heavily on environmental awareness, why on earth would our ancestors dedicate so much precious cognitive bandwidth and so much physical energy to memorizing, repeating, and focusing on a made-up pattern of sounds?
It seems counterintuitive.
It really does. Sitting around focusing on a song seems like a great way to get eaten.
It's a very fair critique. If you view music merely as an idle distraction, it seems deeply maladaptive. But the answer requires us to reframe what that shared pattern of sound was actually doing for the community.
Okay, reframe it for me.
You have to remember the technological context of the time. Before writing, before the printing press, before digital storage, the human brain was the sole archive of a culture's entire existence.
The only hard drive.
Exactly. Everything a tribe knew how to navigate by the stars, which plants were toxic, how to knap flint for a spear, the history of their ancestors, it was all stored exclusively in human memory.
So if an elder died without passing that information on, that section of the archive was permanently deleted.
Yes. Dedicating neural real estate to memorizing patterns wasn't a distraction from survival. It was the primary mechanism of survival.
Oh, I see.
Imitation, repetition, and shared memory formed the cognitive infrastructure that kept the group cohesive and allowed complex knowledge to outlast a single human lifespan.
I understand that they needed to pass down knowledge, but I'm still stuck on the why. Why use music?
What do you mean?
Like, if you need to teach someone how to make a spear, why not just show them the technique? Why go through the trouble of turning knowledge into a rhythmic chant or a melody? That seems like burning unnecessary calories for a hunter-gatherer.
Because melody and rhythm act as a mnemonic safety net. They provide error correction.
Error correction.
Think about it. If I tell you a list of plain facts and you forget the third fact, you might not even realize something is missing. The structure of the sentence doesn't break.
Right, you just move on to fact 4.
But if I embed those facts in a strict rhythm and a specific melodic contour and you forget a line, the rhythm stumbles, the melody breaks. Your brain instantly recognizes the gap because the structural integrity of the pattern has failed. Music forces the information into a rigid temporal frame, making it vastly easier to memorize, transmit, and check for accuracy over long periods.
Ah, okay. That is brilliant. The melody acts as a checksum for the data.
That's a great way to put it.
You can't drop a verse without ruining the rhythm, so you're forced to remember the whole thing accurately. The music literally was the hard drive for the culture, and the rhythm was the file formatting.
Precisely. And because music relies on this strict architecture of time and pitch, it was the most reliable vehicle they had for preserving information across generations.
All right, so we've established how repetition builds this mental architecture, this acoustic hard drive in the brain.
Right.
But music isn't just a cognitive exercise happening internally, it is profoundly physical.
Extremely physical.
Which brings us to a massive pivot point in our deep dive, how this mental pattern escapes the brain, manifests in the physical body, and literally connects multiple human beings together in real-time space.
This is the moment we transition from looking at sound as a vehicle for transmitting information to sound as a physical assertion of presence and a tool for synchronization.
Set the scene for us.
Picture the environmental realities of our ancestors. They often operated in conditions where visual contact was completely useless.
Like at night.
Right. Imagine navigating through a dense primeval forest with heavy undergrowth, or moving through a cave system, or simply operating at night without artificial light.
You wouldn't be able to see your own hand in front of your face, much less keep track of your hunting party.
Exactly. Under those conditions, a vocalization serves a profoundly basic yet critical function. A sound cutting through the dark says, I am physically located right here.
And when a second person responds, their sound says, I hear your location and I am physically located over here.
It establishes a spatial relationship when vision fails. It creates a fundamental social tether.
It's the prehistoric version of Marco Polo.
Basically, yes.
The sound waves travel, they bounce off trees or cave walls, they bypass visual obstacles, and they give you immediate, visceral confirmation that you are not alone in the dark. It's an auditory lifeline.
But here is where the cognitive evolution takes a massive leap. What happens when that practical Marco Polo exchange becomes a regular repeating pattern?
Like, they keep doing it.
Yeah. One person calls out. The other responds. Call. Response. Over time, the interval of silence between the call and the response becomes predictable.
Okay.
The moment that happens, the nature of the interaction shifts entirely. The individuals are no longer just exchanging geographic locations, they are sharing time.
Oh, wow. They are sharing a clock.
Exactly. The focus of the communication shifts from what is being said to when it is happening. A regular repeating beat provides everyone within earshot with an invisible external temporal reference point.
That is wild to think about.
You don't need to look at the sun, you don't need a mechanical clock, and you don't need a leader shouting orders. The rhythm itself acts as a synchronized grid, telling every single nervous system in the area exactly when the next event is going to occur.
Let's ground this in everyday experience.
Okay.
If you are walking down the sidewalk, totally engrossed in a deep conversation with a friend, you aren't paying attention to your bodies at all, but suddenly you look down at your feet and you realize your footsteps have completely synced up.
Yes.
You are both stepping on the exact same microsecond. You didn't plan it. You didn't stop and say, okay, on the count of 3, let's establish a 120 BPM walking tempo.
No, of course not.
Your nervous system's just intuitively found a shared clock in the environment and locked your motor functions into it.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the neurological phenomenon known as entrainment.
Entrainment.
Yes. Human beings are remarkably, almost uniquely, adept at auditory motor entrainment. We can hear an external pulse and subconsciously map our physical movements to match it.
And it's not a rigid mechanical process, right?
Yeah. No, we constantly dynamically adjust our timing. If the person we are walking with speeds up slightly, our brain detects the microshift in tempo and accelerates our motor cortex to compensate.
And if they lag, we pull back.
Right. This requires an astonishing amount of cognitive processing attention, predictive modeling, auditory perception and real-time modification of the physical motor system, and we do it effortlessly.
And when you think about it, coordinating bodies through rhythm is an ancient human instinct that goes way beyond walking.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the history of human physical labor. Chopping down a tree with an axe, hauling in heavy fishing nets, grinding grain with a stone, rowing a boat. All of these grueling physical tasks are cyclical. They have a natural temporal structure.
Human life is entirely dictated by biological and physical cycles. Respiration is a rhythmic cycle. Chewing is rhythmic. A heartbeat is rhythmic.
Right.
What the invention of a shared beat does is take these isolated individual physical cycles and tether them to a collective external sound.
So everyone is on the same page.
Exactly. When a group of individuals syncs their physical movements to a shared auditory pulse, the boundaries between them begin to dissolve. You don't have 5 separate people chopping wood. You have one synchronized machine operating on a single acoustic grid.
Which completely shatters the way we conventionally think about dance.
It really does.
In modern culture, we treat dance as an accessory to music. The music is the main dish, and the dance is the side item you choose to do to the music if you feel like it.
Right, like an afterthought.
But based on this biological reality, dance isn't separate from music at all. Dance is literally just synchronization made visible. It is the motor system's physical manifestation of the auditory input.
That is a highly accurate way to conceptualize it. The rhythm provides the invisible temporal architecture, and the human body moves to fill that structure.
And when multiple bodies move together on the same beat,
It creates a powerful sensory feedback loop. The group doesn't just hear the same auditory input. They feel the physical exertion at the same exact moment, and they visually witness everyone else participating in the exact same pattern.
it creates a multisensory environment of total group cohesion.
Yes.
Which brings us to what I think is the most mind-bending paradigm shift of this entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If music is inherently this deeply physical, fully shared, synchronizing survival tool, then we have to take a hard look at our modern musical culture.
We really do.
Because the way we consume music today is incredibly bizarre when you view it through the lens of evolutionary anthropology. We have entirely separated the concept of a musician from the concept of an audience.
The strict segregation between the performer on a stage and the passive consumer in the crowd is an incredibly recent anomaly in human history.
Really recent.
For the vast majority of our existence, music was not a product to be consumed. It was an activity to be done. It was a participatory state.
Think about the physical reality of the very first instrument. We mentioned earlier that we weren't talking about bone flutes.
Yeah.
The original ultimate musical instrument was the human body itself. And as an instrument, it is flawless.
It's completely portable.
It requires zero maintenance, no tuning pegs, no rare materials to construct, and most importantly, every single member of the community already owns one.
And because the instrument is universally possessed, the potential for participation is universal. If we try to visualize the very first prehistoric orchestra, we have to strip away all our modern concert hall etiquette.
No ushers telling you to be quiet.
Exactly. There's no maestro standing on a podium dictating the tempo. There are no music stands holding complex notation. The creation of the music is entirely decentralized and organic.
Someone begins tapping a rhythm on their chest.
Another person hears the pattern, anticipates the beat, and begins clapping in time.
Voices begin to layer over the percussion, creating a chant. Someone else starts stomping the dirt.
The tempo naturally accelerates or decelerates as the group collectively adjusts to the energy of the moment.
So take that deeply ingrained biological history and compare it to what we do on a Friday night in 2026.
It's a stark contrast.
If you really internalize this evolutionary perspective, a modern concert is a profoundly unnatural environment.
Extremely unnatural.
You go to a massive arena, you pay a lot of money to stand completely still or sit in a designated plastic chair.
Right?
You are surrounded by thousands of other humans, all standing perfectly still in the dark, silently staring at one person or a tiny group of people making sounds on a distant stage.
And the audience is culturally, and sometimes legally, forbidden from participating in the creation of the sound.
Yeah. If you bring a bongo drum into Roji and start aggressively playing along with the band, security is going to physically remove you from the building.
It is a complete inversion of the evolutionary purpose of shared sound. The cognitive mechanisms we've been discussing, the anticipation of the repetition, the locking into the shared clock, those were originally designed by evolution to serve as a direct social invitation.
So it wasn't meant for passive listening.
Not at all. When an early human heard a familiar rhythmic pattern, it wasn't a signal to sit down and listen passively. The rhythm itself was the instruction manual.
You recognize the pattern, your motor cortex engages, and you know immediately that you are expected to join in. The beat demands participation.
Exactly.
This explains so much about human behavior that we usually just dismiss as a quirk.
Like what?
Well, have you ever been sitting at a red light in traffic and a heavy rhythmic song comes on the radio and you suddenly get this uncontrollable primal urge to start aggressively drumming on your steering wheel?
All the time.
Or you're at a baseball game and the stadium starts doing that slow, synchronized clap, and you physically cannot resist joining in even if you don't care about the game.
It's infectious.
That isn't just you liking a song. That is your ancient, prehistoric brain interpreting an acoustic pattern as a social invitation. Your nervous system is screaming, a shared clock has been established. We know how to do this. We are supposed to synchronize.
And that biological compulsion to synchronize leads us directly to the ultimate societal outcome of this entire process. What happens when a group of human bodies successfully locks into the same rhythm, moving and vocalizing as one? It generates something far more profound than just a pleasant melody.
What does it generate?
It generates group identity. It literally creates an us.
That is such a heavy concept. The boundary between the individual ego and the collective group momentarily dissolves.
Yes.
Before the rhythm starts, you just have 15 separate people with individual anxieties, individual hunger, and individual agendas. But once the stomping and the chanting lock into that shared temporal grid, the individuals disappear into the whole, and us emerges from the sound.
Shared sound creates a highly visible, highly audible boundary line. Those who know the specific rhythmic pattern, who understand the cultural memory, and who can physically synchronize their bodies to it, belong to the group.
So the music becomes empirical evidence of participation and belonging. It defines the tribe.
Exactly.
But I want to pump the brakes for a second because I feel a trap opening up here.
What kind of trap?
It would be incredibly easy for us to wrap this up in a neat little bow and conclude, so music evolved solely as a prehistoric team-building exercise to make humans cooperate.
Like it was just an ancient corporate retreat trust fall.
Right. But the source material is very careful to avoid that kind of reduction, isn't it?
Yes, the authors explicitly warn against falling into the trap of functional reductionism. Evolution is almost never that clean or singular in its purpose.
So we can't just say music is for team building.
No, we cannot point to music and declare it evolved for one specific reason. There is no single evolutionary mandate for music. It is far more likely that musicality emerged as a massive overlapping of multiple simultaneous functions.
A biological Swiss Army knife made of sound waves.
That's a perfect analogy. It functioned as a tool for parent-child regulation, as we analyzed earlier. It functioned as a mnemonic device to preserve the cultural hard drive.
It coordinated the physical exertion of group labor.
Yes. And it played a massive role in courtship displays, in religious or spiritual rituals, and in simple social play. Evolutionary biology frequently relies on repurposing existing mechanisms.
So, a biological capacity that evolves to solve a problem in one specific context can easily be hijacked and expanded to serve entirely different contexts.
Exactly.
So let's trace a practical example of that repurposing.
Okay, let's say a sound that might have originated strictly as a raw, involuntary emotional vocalization.
Like a sharp, high-pitched scream of fear when seeing a snake.
Right. That scream gets repurposed over generations. The group realizes that high pitch causes a spike in adrenaline. So they take that acoustic structure, they organize it, and they deploy it during a ritual. Suddenly, it's not a scream of fear anymore. It's a deliberate acoustic tool used to build psychological tension in a ceremonial setting.
And this is where music reveals its most sophisticated power. It inherits the raw emotional opacity of the human voice, but it abstracts it.
Abstracted how? Music manipulates all the acoustic dimensions we explored in the beginning. The tempo, the volume, the deliberate pauses, the rising pitch to communicate internal states without requiring a literal explanation. A piece of music can construct an unbearable sense of rising tension and anxiety without ever giving the listener a specific threat to be anxious about.
It can induce a state of profound, overwhelming calm without providing any logical argument for why the listener should feel safe.
Yes, it bypasses the language centers of the brain entirely and manipulates the emotional state directly through acoustic architecture.
It is essentially emotional manipulation in its purest, most socially acceptable form.
The reality of how music evolved is vastly richer than simply declaring it a tool for cooperation. Human culture took these deeply embedded biological capacities, the auditory system's ability to detect micro-variations in pitch, the motor system's ability to lock into a rhythm, the cognitive ability to imitate and remember, and relentlessly expanded upon them.
Over thousands of years, sound evolved past immediate practical communication. It transformed into tradition.
Right. A specific rhythm was no longer just a way to chop wood. It belonged exclusively to a sacred burial ceremony.
A specific melodic contour didn't just soothe a baby, it carried the history of a specific bloodline. Sound became the vessel that carried human identity.
It went from a terrified individual yelling, "I am here in the dark," to an entire civilization declaring, "We are this."
That is a staggering evolutionary journey.
It really is.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of conceptual ground today. Let's try to pull all these threads together and summarize the journey we've been on.
Sounds good.
We started by stripping away instruments and looking at the raw, emotional horsepower of a single human voice. We explored how the desperate need to soothe an infant forced adults to structure those sounds into repetitive, predictable patterns.
Then we broke down how repetition hacked the brain's reward system, turning temporary noises into permanent memories.
Effectively creating the first cultural hard drives. We saw how a recurring beat established a shared clock, allowing disparate nervous systems to synchronize their motor functions.
Which turns out to be the biological truth behind dance.
And finally, we saw how that physical synchronization birthed a sense of collective identity, turning sound into the traditions that define who we are.
If there is one core thesis to extract from all the anthropological and acoustic sources we've examined, it is this: the true monumental transformation in the history of music was not the aesthetic journey from noise into melody.
What was it then?
It was the sociological transformation of individual sound into shared experience.
Individual sound into shared experience. That is a brilliant distillation. But as the source material hints at the very end of the text, this evolutionary story is far from over.
Not even close.
In fact, it drops us off on the edge of an entirely new frontier, because everything we have spent the last hour breaking down the shared clock, the emotional resonance of pitch, the dopamine loop of repetition, all of it demands a receiver that is biologically capable of processing it.
It absolutely points to the next major question. Why does the architecture of the human brain care so deeply about temporal patterns?
Why do we feel the absence of an expected beat as a physical jolt?
Why can a specific melodic sequence remain perfectly locked in an Alzheimer's patient's memory for 80 years, long after they have forgotten their own name?
It's wild.
The true story of music doesn't just lie buried out there in prehistoric archaeological sites. It is actively firing right now in the neurology of prediction, expectation, and motor auditory entrainment. The human mind is not just receptive to music, it appears to be fundamentally built for it.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to chew on as you go about the rest of your day.
Uh-oh.
We have just spent this entire massive deep dive establishing the biological and historical reality that music evolved as an inherently shared, profoundly physical, social glue.
Right.
Its fundamental ancient purpose was to assert, I am here and we are moving together. It was an evolutionary mechanism designed to synchronize bodies, regulate nervous systems, and forge a cohesive tribe out of vulnerable individuals.
But what happens when we change that?
Exactly. I want you to consider what happens to our psychology in the modern era. When you put on a pair of incredibly expensive noise-canceling headphones, and you pull up a private stream on your phone, and you pump a song directly into your ear canals, completely isolated from the physical bodies and voices of everyone in the room with you.
Are you actually experiencing music?
Or are you essentially hacking an ancient social survival tool to self-medicate against modern isolation? Are we just chemically tricking our prehistoric brains into feeling the comfort of being part of a synchronized tribe while we sit entirely alone staring at our phones on a crowded subway?
It is a genuinely profound and somewhat unsettling question. We are utilizing a powerful cognitive mechanism that evolution explicitly built for deep interpersonal connection.
But our modern technology allows us to consume the neurochemical rewards of that mechanism in total physical isolation.
It's something we definitely need to think about.
It is definitely something to ponder the next time you instinctively reach for your earbuds to block out the world. Before we go, I want to take you back to that opening scene one last time. The twilight.
The twilight, the heavy silence of the ancient brush, the two early humans. One takes a breath and makes a sound. The other hears the pattern, remembers it, and responds.
The connection is forged.
The shared clock begins ticking, and humanity hasn't stopped keeping time since. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking for those ancient patterns in your daily life, and we will catch you on the next one.